evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's December 15th, 2024. Coming up to the end of the year here. We're heading into the silly season, the holiday season. One would maybe think, if one was naive or unfamiliar with the way that Alberta politics works, this is when we would see things slow down. But oh boy, would you be wrong. We have so much to talk about tonight. It's a little ridiculous. So we're going to get right into it. To start off with, we got to follow up on what was an extended conversation on our last live show, last Sunday's show. And the reason why we have to follow up on this is because there were a couple of stories that were published in regards to the Turkish Tylenol. This is the, many would argue, probably Danielle Smith would be the only one who doesn't, but many would argue that this was the largely unnecessary Tylenol, knockoff Tylenol, the Tylenol, the Skylenol, so many good names for it, that Danielle Smith dropped upwards of $100 million of taxpayers' money into a couple years back when there was a bit of a shortage. The problem was with that whole situation, they screwed up that deal royally, and by the time that any of the materials actually got to Alberta, the shortage was months over. Now, here's where we're going to do a quick little recap, and then we're going to get into they did some updates to some of the stories that were published that we were talking about last week. So to refresh it, in total, the province spent on just the drugs, and this is where it gets to be important. This is why I'm comfortable saying that it's upwards of $100 million, because we also have to talk about shipping. We got to talk about storage. We got to talk about a bunch of other things. The final number is absolutely not $70 million. That being said, though, when we're talking about the overall the numbers, this is where it gets to be a little bit important. So, talking about the numbers, the province spent $70 million up front to import 5 million bottles of product. Now, the product was going to be a mix of some acetaminophen or knockoff Tylenol and some ibuprofen or knockoff children's Motrin or children's Advil. All of that was being imported under a special Health Canada. Well, you say you have an emergency, your chief medical officer of health says you have an emergency. We're going to believe you that you in fact have an emergency. So, okay, here we go. There's your emergency approval. The problem is that Health Canada only approved 1.5 million bottles. That's worth roughly $21 million of the product. So there was some money that didn't get spent on the product. It gets to be a lot there. So money didn't get spent. People were wondering, hey, where's the things and the stuff? Turns out there's a credit of $49 million. And the reason why there's a credit of $49 million is the way that the deal was brokered, the way that it was originally written. All of the money had to be paid up front. Now, this is where there was a little bit of confusion last week, because AHS, in one of the earlier reports of, hey, what happened to the money, AHS said the $70 million prepayment went to Edmonton-based medical supplier MH Care Medical. But it turns out that Atabay has been confirmed. This was in the reporting by Matthew Black. One of these days, I'm going to get the pointing at the pictures things right. It was confirmed by Matthew Black that the money did, in fact, go to Atabay. So Adriana Lagrange actually confirmed that Atabay was earning interest on the balance of the money. So once again, only $21 million went towards actually getting drugs. Because the deal was paid up front, there was $49 million that was given to MH Care, who then, Matthew Black has since confirmed, they gave it to Atabay. So Atabay is sitting on $49 million, a Turkish company that is not in Canada, nor is it in Alberta. This company is making interest on that $49 million. How much interest are we talking about? Well, it's 2.5 years worth of interest. So even going with, let's say that they're hot garbage investors, Atabey is, which we're not saying by any stretch of the imagination, even going with that, they could be earning up to 2 million, at least, sorry, not up to, at least $2 million of interest. Now, this is interest on taxpayers' money that we gave to them for nothing so far, because we don't need the ibuprofen anymore. We don't need the acetaminophen. It's going to be a show. We don't need the acetaminophen anymore. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of money that Atabey is making just in interest, just sitting on this money. Now, where it gets even more complicated is depending on who you talk to, there's different things that could be holding things up. In a year-end interview, Daniel Smith said, "We're waiting for Health Canada to work with AHS to identify the products, get the formulations, approve it so that we're able to execute it on it. These things take time." But let's be clear, Health Canada doesn't say to AHS, "Hey, let's take a look at what drugs you need. Let us help with your procurement process." That's not what Health Canada does. AHS as an organization goes, "Hey, what do we need? What are the drugs that we're having a hard time getting that we would like this company to provide us? What are the options?" And then puts together a package that goes through MH Care to get the rest of the products approved by Health Canada. Then, if they meet all the requirements, like the right dosing, the right labels, all of that other stuff, then it can get shipped in. But hasn't happened yet. So this is where it gets particularly wild, because Matthew Black with Post Media did a FOIP, and they got over 1,200 documents back from AHS, which, and we have a couple of FOIPs pending with AHS, is not going to be cheap for them. So well done on spending that money. But among the documents is an internal AHS email between pharmacy and procurement staff that states, "At this time, our back orders of concern do not include any Atabey offerings." So there's no products that AHS needs that Atabey offers. But again, Atabey, the company that never even made the product that AHS ordered in the first place, the payroll, as we've taken to calling it at the show, Atabey is making mad bank off of the interest. Well, I mean, you think about what you could do with $2 million. Think about what you could do for $2 million for healthcare. Think about maybe the things that you could get, the wages that you could pay. And this is where we pivot to our little story on the EMS crisis in the province of Alberta. Fascinating story came out just recently where I don't know if you can call him a whistleblower. For the record, not me. So just getting that out of the way. Anybody who's been a long time follower of the show knows that I work professionally as a paramedic. And so I'm about to, as a paramedic, comment on paramedic things, but I'm doing so not speaking for anybody but myself, and only referencing materials that were provided to Global, because Global ran a story and they talked about an Alberta paramedic is sounding the alarm. They provided Global News with a series of screenshots detailing the staffing vacancies for EMS, and it sounds like this is just in Calgary. The way the story is written, it sounds like this is just in Calgary. It could be province-wide. The story doesn't say for sure. Do with that what you will. But the screenshots that they took show that there are more than 200 shifts on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and New Year's Eve that are currently unfilled. Now, if you just do a little bit of math, given that ambulances have two practitioners, whether it's a advanced care paramedic or a primary care paramedic, well, each of you can have a mix of you can have both, you can one or the other. It's an option, but you need to have two people on an ambulance to make it run. So what this Global News story is saying is that and this is so bonkers. When we're talking about the staffing shortage for those 3 days, you're talking about a shortage of 50 ambulances on some of the busiest travel days of the year. Certainly, New Year's Eve is a bit of a barn burner historically, so that's not nothing. A lot of things that $2 million could go towards. Not saying, just saying. Moving on from there, one of the big stories of the week that we absolutely have to acknowledge is the announcement that came by Rachel Notley on December 12th at 9 a.m. Went out on all of her socials. Rachel Notley announced her resignation as an MLA effective December 30th, 2024. So it's just like a week and a half left that she's going to be remaining as an MLA. Now, there's a lot of people who have stepped forward to say Rachel did a lot of wonderful things for the province. There's some people who stepped forward who said, oh, thank God she's leaving. The reality is, Rachel Notley was only the second female premier in the province of Alberta, and she took over the reins of the province during an extremely challenging time. There was an economic downturn that was going on. There was a serious problem with oil and gas prices. All of this affected government revenues. All of this was completely outside of her control. And as we're going to be returning to this story throughout the evening, if you have any doubts that oil prices were outside of Rachel Notley's control, one need look no farther than how desperately Danielle Smith is turning herself into knots to try to make sure that the oil market in the United States doesn't become problematic for the province of Alberta because it's out of her control. So you can't blame Rachel Notley for what happened in oil and gas when she became premier of Alberta. It's definitely going to be another signal that things are changing for the provincial NDP. And one of the questions that has absolutely come up is, will new leader of the Alberta NDP, Naheed Nenshi, run in the vacant seat in Edmonton? Now, it gets to be complicated because on one hand, he's heavily criticized Danielle Smith for running in an area that she doesn't live in, has no ties to. He's been a little direct on that. So for Naheed Nenshi to run in Edmonton, there's a little contradiction going on there. But in an interview with the Tyee, Nenshi talked openly about the possibility of running in Edmonton. The quote from the Tyee: I'm certainly willing to look at Edmonton because I split my time between the two cities. And quite frankly, I think it'd be good for me to learn more about Edmonton. So the narrative that Team Nenshi is very clearly putting forward is, well, I'm going to be the premier anyways, so I should probably learn more about the other big city. Now, this comes on the heels of a poll that we talked about last episode. Got people a little excited that shows that the NDP is actually losing support pretty much everywhere across the province. So this could be a smart decision by Naheed Nenshi to go into the city of Edmonton to try to shore things up, but it's obviously open for a lot of debate. So throw your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what you think about that. Which brings us to, speaking of by-elections, we're just a couple of days away, folks. Today is the 15th. On December 18th, Lethbridge West goes to the polls. They're kind of sort of already there. They had the early voting. It actually ended on Saturday, but the big day, E-Day, is going to be on the 18th, which coincides with something else that's happening on the 18th. We're gonna plug that a little bit later, because one of the things that you have to be a little bit aware of is Danielle Smith has made it very, very clear that no elections in Alberta going forward shall use those darn counting machines, those Scantron machines that work so well for determining the futures of Alberta students, university students, so many things. Those Scantron machines cannot be trusted to do a count of the election. So presumably, The count that's going to be going on in Lethbridge West is going to be a hand count. So it might take a little bit of time for the results to come in. We got you covered. We got a very special show planned for that on the 18th. You're going to want to stick around. But what's interesting about the Lethbridge West election, the competition that's going on, is there are only 3 candidates that are running. The UCP has John Middleton Hope running. The NDP has Rob Miyashiro. And the Alberta Party, still apparently a little bit of kick left in that thing, is running Leighton Viverka. Sorry if I'm not getting your last name right, Leighton. They are the 3 candidates that are running in Lethbridge West. And why this gets to be interesting is because in the run-up to tonight's show, we were wondering, hey, there's only these 3 political candidates that are running. So we checked Elections Alberta. Sure enough, there's only the 3 political candidates that are running, the UCP, the NDP, and the Alberta Party. But where that gets to be wild is when you take a look at how many parties there are that are officially registered in the province of Alberta. There are 14 parties that are registered in the province of Alberta. Now, obviously, some of these are paper parties, if you will, certain pro-choice parties that exist purely to make sure that they're able to raise funds and take advantage of all of the little loopholes that you get when you're a political party. They've been very candid about that being the point of their existence. But it's an interesting commentary on the Alberta political landscape, where historically by-elections are the upset elections. And by upset elections, what I mean is when it's a whole provincial election, there's that greater theme that exists. There's that concern of, oh, we can't vote the way that we want to. I really want to vote for so-and-so, but I just don't want to see the other party, the NDP, the UCP. I just don't want to see them get in. I would really like to vote for the Alberta Party or WIPA or the Liberals. I'd love to vote for one of the many other, the literally 11 other parties that are out there. Well, 12 other parties other than the 2 mainstream ones. I'd really like to vote for one of them, but it's a provincial election. Oh, I can't risk that so-and-so winning. So I'm going to vote for one of the 2 main contenders. By-elections are different. And by-elections are different because the stakes are just for that constituency. So a lot of people, a lot of politicos view by-elections as an opportunity for people to actually vote the way that they want to, as opposed to the way that they're afraid to vote. Because government is not going to change on the basis of this by-election. Now, one of the other downfalls of a by-election is absolutely there tends to be lower voter turnout because, again, the stakes aren't quite so high. But there is the opportunity for change. And so the fact that of the 14 political parties in the province of Alberta, only 3 could find candidates who willing to run in Lethbridge West speaks pretty clearly to how weakened all of the other political parties are and how Alberta is very much a 2.1 party system now. I mean, the Alberta Party, they got a candidate in there, so I got to give them a little bit of points. But that's the reality. It's going to be fascinating to see how that election breaks or folds, depending on whose side you're on, I guess. We'll be watching, but again, we'll be watching something else on Wednesday, the 18th. We're going to talk more about that a little bit later. So stay tuned for that, as the kids say. Moving on from there, we got to talk about this little story, this little story that happened, because it's a pretty fascinating and it's a pretty important story that was published in the Narwhal. And so basically it's weird is the best way to say it. And a surprise to absolutely no one who has been in Alberta or paid attention to Alberta, particularly the oil and gas sector, for quite some time. There are some companies that don't follow the rules. This is why we have the huge orphan wells problem that we have. But So it's not a shock to find out that some people aren't playing by the rules. But what's really interesting about this story isn't just the companies that were caught not playing by the rules and what they were caught not playing by the rules for, but the fact that the government of Alberta went out of their way for 3 years to try to cover up who had broken the rules. From the story, the names of the company with late or unpaid fees include firms that wound up under bankruptcy protection or had their operations shut down for serious environmental infractions, such as Everest Canadian Resources and Sunshine Oil Sands. But the firms that got fined for not following the rules also include larger multinational corporations, including Coke, Imperial Oil, ConocoPhillips, and MEG Energy, which faced fines for paying fees late. Now, there's two pieces here that get to be important. When we're talking about these huge multinational corporations, and these are big companies that I just listed off there, when we're talking about these huge multinational corporations just not paying the fees, it's because they don't care. Not only do they not care because they just don't care, but there's not a big enough penalty. There's not a big enough motivation for these companies to just follow the damn rules. They just don't, because it's not worth their time. But where it gets really, really wild is that the reporter who was chasing this story down, Mike D'Souza, he was chasing this story down, and they actually, the Narwhal ran a follow-up story about this story where they talked about the fact that it was 3 years of pursuit by Mike D'Souza to get this story to the world because the government of Alberta was actively trying to keep this information. Name the companies. The government of Alberta was actively working. Pardon me. The government of Alberta was actively working to make sure that those companies didn't get held to account in the public sphere at the very least. So when you hear people talking about the idea of there's a certain degree of regulatory capture that exists in the province of Alberta, it's pretty clear that there's definitely a pretty big regulatory capture that's happened in the province of Alberta. Moving on from there. And this gets to be important for a couple of different reasons. We just want to revisit the Sovereignty Act motion that Danielle Smith put forward. So, to go back, and this ties to the story that we just talked about, but it ties to a bunch of stories that we're going to be talking about. On the beginning of December, Danielle Smith launched her Sovereignty Act motion fighting the federal emissions cap, which she insists on calling a production cap, even though the oil companies and the government of Canada say, no, it's an emissions cap. As long as they get their emissions under control, they can produce as much as they want. Danielle Smith doesn't seem to have faith that the oil companies can do that. Which is dissonant. But she does not like the emissions cap. She says that it's a production cap. And instead of the oil companies suing the government of Canada, Danielle Smith is suing the government of Canada because emissions are not a pressing concern for her. Her argument is that emissions and production is actually solely the jurisdiction of the provinces of Alberta. So she's done a couple of different things with the Sovereignty Act challenge. She's issued a court challenge. This is where it gets nutty, though. She's banning provincial bodies from enforcing those caps, which a lot of people went, well, that's nuts. But when you take it in the context of that story that we just talked about, where it took 3 years for the government of Alberta to disclose who had gotten fines for not doing the bare minimum, it starts to be believable really, really quickly. She's designating oil and gas sites critical infrastructure. There's a lot of people have already pointed out, well, they kind of already are. Kenny did that, but okay, if we're adding things to the list, we can check that one off as a meaningless, futile thinger. She's banning anyone not approved by the province. They don't get to go into oil and gas facilities. So if you're a federal inspector, in Danielle Smith's mind, if you're a federal inspector and you're going to inspect an oil and gas facility, you're not allowed in unless the province gives you permission, which is interesting because there's a lot of times where people who have very specialized skill sets get flown into areas to work on oil and gas sites and then get flown out. It's a one and done. They don't have. Sometimes it's even a response to a quickly developing situation, maybe not an emergency in the traditional sense, but there's a problem that needs to be dealt with by specialized individuals. So now that problem is theoretically going to be extended because that person may not be on Danielle Smith's list of people who are allowed to go into the oil and gas facilities. It's all very confusing. And then she's declaring all emissions data owned by only the Alberta government. So if you own a oil and gas site and you capture all of your emissions data, because that's a requirement of doing that, of owning that site, of operating that site, that data that you have generated doesn't actually belong to you. It now, by decree of the Sovereignty Act, by decree of the Sovereignty Act, it now is owned purely by the provincial government. Because jurisdiction, so important. If there's a pressing issue, then the jurisdiction becomes the most important thing. You can probably all guess where we're going to get to eventually. But before we get there, we got to talk about this bizarre story coming out of Edmonton. So there's a police commissioner. He's currently the head of the Edmonton Police Commission. His spouse moved to Portugal. And he wants to move to Portugal too, which is fine because if you've married a person, presumably you like them, you enjoy spending time with them. So he wants to move to Portugal. But where it gets wild is he has 2 years left of his term on the Edmonton Police Commission, and he's not going to stop serving on the Edmonton Police Commission from his statement. And this is, again, gets to be important in a bunch of different ways. I am pleased to announce that I am retiring to Portugal after a 35-year career serving our country as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces. While my time as chair of the Edmonton Police Commission ends on December 31st, 2024, I plan to continue serving Edmontonians for the remainder of my term as a commissioner. As an appointment of the government of Alberta, I sought approval from the minister's office, and they supported me in this decision. Let me just go ahead and read that again because it gets to be super pertinent in just a couple minutes here. As an appointee of the government of Alberta, I sought approval from the minister's office, and they supported me in this decision. He then goes on to make some fascinating little bizarre legal arguments. I can assure Edmonton that my continued service adheres to all rules regarding my new accommodation, as there are no residency requirements for commissioners appointed by the City of Edmonton or the Government of Alberta. To be clear, residency requirements are not stipulated by the Police Act or the City's Police Commission bylaw. I've resided in Edmonton and Alberta for a very long time, and my ties to this community do not simply disappear when I step on an airplane, albeit to move to another country. That was editorializing. I'm also not the first Edmonton Police Commission member who doesn't reside in the city of Edmonton, so this does not come without precedent. Now, he doesn't say there who is the other police commissioner who doesn't live in Edmonton, but there's probably some fine print that gets to be really important here because let's say that they live in, I don't know, Red Deer, Spruce Grove. Maybe they have a nice little acreage, a farm, perhaps, outside of the city of Edmonton. Not technically in the Edmonton area, but at least they still live in the province and in the country. But where this gets particularly wild is Mike Ellis was actually asked about this at a press conference on December 13th. And his reaction is a little dissonant with what the chair of the Edmonton Police Commission had to say in his statement.
The current chair of the Edmonton Police Commission is retiring to Portugal. Oh. John McDougall's term expires December 31st, 2026. Is it okay that he will continue to serve on the commission while living overseas?
I think I vaguely had heard that he was moving overseas. I know his partner had moved overseas. I was not aware that he would be performing his duties while overseas, so it's the first time hearing of this. My information that's been provided to me, I'm happy to get some corrections if that is not the case, but my understanding is that he will be in Edmonton while performing the duties, and that only when he is done and retired will he be moving to Portugal.
Okay, so a lot to unpack here. The statement from the chair of the Edmonton Police Commission. Again, I'm going to read it word for word. As an appointee of the government of Alberta, I sought approval from the minister's office, and they supported me in this decision. But there we have the minister in charge of this, who, when asked the question, was like, "Oh." His literal first reaction was shocked expression. And then he proceeded to say, I'd heard that his wife was going and, or his spouse. And my understanding is that he'll absolutely be staying in the city as long as he's got these roles. So we're left with some questions. Because either Mike Ellis just put on the best performance of bullshitting at a press conference that he's ever done. And I'm not saying that he's never bullshit at a conference before, but I'm going to assume that he's not without practice. He's probably played a game of poker or two in his life. So either he just gave the most Oscar-worthy performance of his public career with the shocked expression and the I'm sure he's going to be staying in Canada, in Edmonton, in Alberta, as he performs the role. That's my understanding. I'm open to correction. Looks off to the aides, gets no correction. So either that was just an incredible performance, or we have some other options here. One of them is the Edmonton Police Commissioner lied, or it wasn't actually Mike Ellis that the Edmonton Police Commissioner spoke to. It was somebody working in Mike Ellis's office, like, say, a staffer. This gets to be important really, really quickly. But before we get to why it's so important, there was some other stuff that happened in the Edmonton, the overlap between Edmonton policing stuffs and Alberta politics this week has been absolutely nuts. So we got to talk about a couple of other things. One of the other things is this isn't the first time that a member of the Edmonton Police Commission has raised some eyebrows, because we got to talk about this dude yet again. This is Jyan Nagrendran. I'm not trying to do that on purpose. I apologize sincerely for not getting the pronunciation right. Jyan Nagrendran. And he is a surgeon, and by all reason to believe he's a very impressive surgeon. He's the director of the Division of Cardiac Surgery at the University of Alberta, as well as the surgical director of lung transplantation for Alberta Health Services. He's got a heck of a resume. He's done a lot of different things in his life. But the reason why his appointment raised some eyebrows is because one of his accomplishments is he ran a company with, that Turkish Tylenol guy. We're talking about Sam Marash. So they had a numbered company that they worked together on for quite a few years, and it was only dissolved in April of 2024. Now, he was actually appointed to the position of being on the Edmonton Police chair. He was one of the first appointees made by the provincial government to the police commission. You might remember a while back, there's a whole bunch of furor because historically cities made their own appointments to the police commissions, but Daniel Smith and UCP changed the rules around how that worked. They got to appoint a certain number of people to the Edmonton Police Commission themselves. One of the two appointees that Daniel Smith appointed was Sam Marash's business partner, while he was still his business partner. The timing is not great. So a lot of people have been sort of wondering what's going on with all of these appointments and all of the permissions that are being granted to the Edmonton Police Commission. But again, not the only story coming out of Edmonton with policing, because the other big news was that the Edmonton chief of police, he's got himself a new job. So he resigned on November 20th of this year, and he held a press conference explaining why he resigned and when the effective date of his resignation was going to be on November 21st.
Why now?
A couple reasons. I think the fact is that I feel, honestly, as I stated up front, we're in good shape to go forward. I'm tired of some of the rhetoric that I've had to go through over the last little while, and it's taken a toll. But I also think there's other opportunities for me that I will move on to in the not too distant future. But I don't want to lose sight that I'm the chief of this police service till February 21st.
He's the chief of police in the city of Edmonton to February 21st, 2025. He's leaving the job because he's tired of rhetoric. And you know what? What works really well if you're tired of working in a deeply polarized environment? If you take a weekend, because that's literally all he's taking before he moves into the role of Deputy Minister of Executive Council and Clerk of Executive Council, as well as Secretary to Cabinet. Nothing says, I'd like less drama than by hitching your wagon to the UCP government here in Alberta. But let's talk for a quick sec about why the staffer piece is so important. Because if we move back to talking about the Portugal situation, the head of the chair of the Edmonton Police Commission, he swears on a stack of Bibles. He wrote it. He put a statement out where he said, no, I talked to the ministry. Ministry said they're cool. Mike Ellis had his, I don't know what's happening here. I'm very confused. Somebody please a Delta for me moment in front of the cameras. The only logical explanations are the chief is lying, Mike Ellis is putting on a show, or the chief, the head of the police commission, not the chief of police, different things. The chair of the police commission spoke to somebody in Mike Ellis's office. If that somebody wasn't Mike Ellis, that by definition makes them a staffer. And this is where it gets to be really problematic really quick. Because one of the other things that happened in the last little while, on December 11th, a UCP committee, dominated committee, voted to recommend that exemptions exist for staffers from conflict of interest rules. This goes back again to Sam Raish and the whole Turkish Tylenol scandal, because one of the things that we saw come out of all of that was the associated hockey scandal. So this is where multiple ministers and allegedly multiple staffers, we know for sure some staffers went, because you can see one of them in the picture here. Becca Polak. We did a whole deep dive on this photo and a couple other photos and what it showed. This is Becca Polak accepting a Skybox hockey ticket, reportedly from Danielle Smith, that would have been worth well in excess of what she was allowed to accept as a gift. So Becca Polak violated, by all available evidence, Becca Polak violated the conflict of interest rules. Now, those conflict of interest rules exist to make sure that the staffers, the key people who get to decide what information gets in front of the ministers and the premier, aren't compromised. They aren't corrupted by big, expensive gifts. Now, it's been alleged that there were a lot of other staffers that attended the rotating door of Sam Raish's Edmonton Skybox. He likes his Skyboxes. The seats are good. I hear they have nice cheeses. I don't know. I've never been in one. I'm not a political staffer. But reportedly, there's a lot of rumors that are in circulation that there were many staffers that rotated through Sam Raish's Skybox in Edmonton. That would also be a violation of the conflict of interest rules. So if you don't want your staffers to violate conflict of interest rules, one thing that you could do is say to them, don't violate the conflict of interest rules. It won't be tolerated. You won't have a job. The other thing that you could do is just make sure there's no conflict of interest rules for staffers. And this is precisely what that UCP committee has put forward. They've put forward the recommendation to the Premier's office that staffers should be exempt. Now, the hockey is a real world example, but the fact that the head of the police commission, the chair of the police commission, was able to speak to, apparently, presumably, a staffer in Mike Ellis's office and get approval to literally live in another country for 2 years while serving on the Edmonton Police Commission is a very good example of why staffers need to be held to high standards, because now we've got ourselves a bit of a conundrum. If you live in the city of Edmonton, you got a little bit of a problem there, because Mike Ellis very clearly knew nothing about it. So not only can staffers clearly make people who are serving, they're in roles serving the public, believe that they can do things that clearly the minister wouldn't have necessarily signed off on. But when you imagine, and by no means am I suggesting that the chair of the Edmonton Police Commission took anybody to any Skybox hockey games. By no means am I suggesting that. But let's say that staffers were able to do these things without violating any sort of conflict of interest rules. Let's say that this recommendation from this UCP committee goes through and Smith says, sounds like a great plan, which, let's be honest, wouldn't be terribly off brand for her. There would be nothing stopping somebody from saying, hey, staffer, I'd really like you to just give me permission to go live in Paraguay. I'd really like you to do that. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you year-round Skybox seats. It's cool. It's not against the rules. So if you wouldn't mind writing me a letter that just says that I can go do that, then everybody wins, right? They haven't violated a conflict of interest, even though it's a clear conflict of interest. And there's a lot of different things that staffers can do. Like I said, staffers can get information. They can get people in front of ministers and the Premier. So to just say staffers should be exempt from all conflict of interest rules is very clearly serving not the people of Alberta. And it gets even more alarming because let's say hypothetically, and I'm just spitballing here, let's say hypothetically that one could draw a direct line from somebody who's a staffer to somebody who is a minister who maybe has ties to Skybox tickets. It's not like there are members of, I don't know, the Turkish Tylenol guy, Sam Marish's family that are currently listed in the government directory. Are there? Oh, wait. Yes, that's exactly what it is. Because Maud Jabara and Mahmoud Jabara are both policy advisors in two different ministries. They are government staffers. So the guys who are related to the guy who did the Turkish Tylenol deal that has seen a foreign company earn $2 million of interest, at least $2 million of interest a year on taxpayers' money, when that $49 million could be used for, God can only imagine how many different things in the province of Alberta. Those two guys are staffers. And if they were trying to influence anybody in government by nature of the fact that they're in the government buildings, that would be no conflict of interest. It's stunning that the UCP committee would vote this idea forward. But it also, again, underscores the fact that this is not a conservative government. This is an entitled, corrupt government. Imagine, if you will, that Rachel Notley, when she was in government, had said, hey, you know what? I want all of the NDP staffers, everybody who's not an elected official, I want all of them to be able to accept gifts from anybody. Damn the numbers. Imagine what the reaction of conservatives across the province would have been, because it would be an ethically corrupt move. But nonetheless, this is the ethically corrupt move that the UCP committee made just a few days ago. Moving on from there. We got to talk about the border. Danielle Smith, she's doing things at the border. We're gonna have a little fun here. We're playing with the AI things now. That's not a real picture of Danielle Smith. That's an AI generated picture of Danielle Smith. If you pay close attention to them as we go through this segment, you'll have a little bit of fun. But Danielle Smith, she made it clear right after Donald Trump was elected, he announced that he was going to be putting tariffs on all products coming from Canada. And Danielle Smith on November 28th, she was making it very clear she was going to do the things.
Question on jurisdiction when it comes to federal versus provincial. And I'm looking at your statement yesterday on Border Patrol. You're talking about Alberta will be acting urgently and decisively to patrol our own shared border with Montana. Now, international borders are a federal responsibility. Could you explain how Alberta would get involved in that?
Well, there's a couple of things that we're contemplating. First of all, as you know, we promised in the last election, so well before the current crisis, that we were going to establish specialized sheriff units. So we have a specialized scan team. Those are shutting down drug houses. We've got a specialized team that is doing fugitive apprehension. We just had a major success in executing 1,000 warrants in conjunction with the RCMP and the EPS in Northern Alberta, where we've opened a second fugitive apprehension team in Southern Alberta. And we've been talking about having a special border patrol as well as a fentanyl apprehension team. And so I would imagine it would work very much the same way that our fugitive apprehension team has, that we would put resources together and work with our counterparts to make sure that if we're seeing any illegal activity happening, either coming into Canada or going on away from Canada into the United States, that we have the ability to apprehend those individuals and make sure that they see justice. I think that's what Albertans expect. I think it's what our American counterparts expect, and I think it's just good policy.
I'm sorry, now how does that work? Because it's a federal jurisdiction, the border. The RCMP is involved, you got the Border Patrol, the federal agents. How does Alberta fit into that on a very basic sense? Do you have then sheriffs or somebody else at the border as well, checking people as they come across?
Well, I think what we discovered when the presidential permit for the Keystone XL pipeline was canceled from the White House, that the federal jurisdiction over the border is actually quite narrow. There's a lot of land mass right after you cross the border that we're responsible for. We're responsible for policing. We're responsible for administration of justice. The RCMP is one of the entities that we have contracted to provide services in rural Alberta. Our sheriffs are another entity we've contracted to provide services in rural Alberta. And so those, I think it's incumbent upon us to work with our federal counterparts, our border security, the Montana officials to make sure that we're sharing information and that we're making sure that we're apprehending people who mean to do us harm.
So that was Danielle Smith saying, hey, you know what? We've got a dog in this fight. And she followed up with a fascinating little media tour where she said some fascinating things.
Well, look, let's stop the leaky border first. Let's stop the illegal migration first. Let's stop the fentanyl first. Let's meet our NATO commitment first, and let's see where we get with the Americans. I think that the U.S. has legitimate issues that they have raised with us, and we've got to address those legitimate issues. I don't think that we can say, yeah, but, because quite frankly, the American economy is the strongest in the world. They can produce a lot of what they need to consume. We are very reliant on them, and they are in the position of being able to dictate terms. And so I suppose we could punish ourselves with tariffs, but I would say, why don't we take the approach of trying to figure out how to solve the things that are the trade irritants to them?
So the argument is we should appease the Donald. He said that he's concerned about migrants. He said he's concerned about the fentanyls. We should do something. And again, she doubled down just a little bit later on what her strategy was going to look like.
we're prepared to do our part in Alberta.
Prepared to do your part. What does that actually mean?
What we have been looking at is how we might be able to use our sheriffs and some of the technologies that we developed in forest firefighting. We've been using night vision helicopters and drones with infrared capability as a ability to, we think, be able to monitor that border, hopefully working in conjunction with the Canadian Border Services as well as the RCMP, and we've indicated to the federal government that we're prepared to integrate our resources with their national plan. And barring that, we want to get at least started with our
the drones, the helicopters, all of the things. But there were some questions that came up in regards to what the big plan was here. And on Power Play, CTV Power Play, Vashi Capellos asked some pretty direct questions.
Is there any danger in overstating what is happening at the border? I look more closely at, for example, the Canadian border, in particular with Montana, where there were, in the fiscal year 2024, 3 pounds of fentanyl collected. That's according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection data. There's thousands of pounds at the southern border. Illegal migration, very much so an increasing problem in the first half of last year, but on the decrease substantially, again, according to U.S. data, down 60% in the last 4 months. Is there a danger in you sort of underscoring the narrative that Trump has put out there that there are these major issues at the border if, in fact, they don't exist?
Well, the fact that we haven't apprehended enough of the cross-border products, whether it's fentanyl coming out of Canada or whether it's the precursor agents coming in, I think that should be alarming to all of us. We know we've got an opioid crisis. We know that we have the highest level of opioid deaths that we've ever seen happening in both British Columbia and Alberta. And we know that the American cities are suffering from the same scourge. And so I think that we've got to do our part to make sure that we're addressing the issue. We're apprehending the criminals. We're stopping the movement of drugs. We're shutting down drug houses and labs. And I think that benefits both of us. So I've been concerned about fentanyl and opioid overdoses ever since I became premier. It doesn't stop being an issue. Because it's a joint issue with the Americans. It actually just allows for us to say, yeah, we agree, and we're going to work together to solve it.
Is the issue, though, being overstated, I guess, is my question more specifically, by the incoming U.S. administration? And is there a danger in substantiating, pardon me, that overstatement, if it's not based in fact?
People are dying of fentanyl overdoses every day in Alberta and in British Columbia and across the country, and we should take that seriously. And if it's a combination of factors coming in from the ports in BC or the products coming up from Mexico, I think we should take it seriously because it means that we'll be able to.
A lot of ifs there, a lot of maybes, a lot of, there could be this, there could be that. But there's also some just outright lies. Because Daniel Smith said that opioid deaths were the worst they've ever been in BC and Alberta. Now, fortunately, the province of Alberta provides a dashboard that anybody can go to and see not only what the deaths were now, what they were a couple months ago, but also what the deaths were going back several years. And you don't have to be somebody who is really, really good at seeing the lines to see that when you compare the opioid deaths in 2024 versus 2023 or 2022 or 2021 or even really for the most part 2020, at least definitely the second half of 2020, the opioid deaths in Alberta are actually not at record levels. So Daniel Smith just went on a national news program and just straight up made up scary things to make people afraid. And that's a really important thing to highlight because she also said some other things in there. She talked about the fentanyl crisis and all the fentanyl crossing the border. And let's be really, really clear here. As much as Mickey Amory and a few other ministers have come out and said, yeah, we've got fentanyl coming up from the States, that's not what Donald Trump is trying to be upset about. Donald Trump is not upset that there's fentanyl coming up from the States. What Donald Trump is trying to convince people is that all of the fentanyl is coming into the United States, even though one of the main reasons why fentanyl became so popular is because it's so easy to synthesize. So Donald Trump is not making the argument, yeah, stop us from sending the fentanyl to you, Canada and Mexico, because we can't secure our own borders to stop our drug dealers from sending drugs to you. That is absolutely not the argument that Donald Trump is trying to make. But Daniel Smith and the UCP continuously are trying to stand on the fence to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, the fentanyl trafficking so bad. But here's the problem with that. There's actually data. Vashi referred to some of that in her questioning there, but we took it a step farther because we wanted to see what's the actual data. And according to the CBSA, border officials seized so far in the first 3 quarters of the year 4.9 kilograms of fentanyl. Now, 4.9 sounds like a big number, but 4.1 kilograms of those 4.9 kilograms were leaving Canada to go to the Netherlands. The other seizures, the remainder of that 0.8 kilograms were all small personal amounts caught along the land border, and there are no statistics to suggest significant shipments out of Canada. That's coming from the folks who do the border things. So there's no question that the fentanyl trafficking across the border from Canada out is big, because it's not. I mean, sorry, Netherlands. I guess our bad on that one. But 0.8 kilograms of fentanyl for the remaining 3 quarters of the year is a rounding error. Again, one of the reasons why fentanyl became so popular is because it's so easy to synthesize. You can synthesize it in Canada. You can synthesize it just as easily, if not easier, in the United States. But there's another little clip that we wanted to just take a second while we're in the midst of our debunking that's gotten a lot of attention recently. And it is tragically missing some context, but it's one that has been brought up over and over and over again in social media. And that has to do with the idea that only 1% of what crosses the border is actually searched. That claim comes from this clip.
We do have good intelligence. We work very hard at it. Again, it's simply a matter of more. We need more people. We need more equipment. We search less than 1% of what comes into Canada. Modes like rail.
Less than 1%.
Rail, we don't do at all. We don't look at whatsoever. We don't know what comes in via train. Again, we don't have the infrastructure. Wow. We don't have the people to actually do that work.
I just wanted to ask you to go back on rail. With rail, is that an inability to search just the products coming across, or is that people?
Now, could be either. Could be is one of those terms that you use when you don't have an answer. Maybe. Could be. Possibly. Some people say, if you want to do the Fox News bit. But when you say only 1% comes in, it's important to take into consideration the greater part of the context of what that conversation was. And that conversation had to do with shipping containers. So only 1% of shipping containers that come into Canada are searched. But there's some really important context to wrap your heads around what a big job it would be to search shipping containers that are brought into Canada. By way of example, we did a quick lookup with the CEIC, and they're referencing a UN conference on trade and development. In 2022, Canada container port throughput. So this is how many containers are moving through the ports. 7,010,704. The TEU refers to the standard size of a shipping container. So in 2022, 7 million shipping containers went through the ports in Canada. Now, they averaged it out because some years are better than others, some years are worse than others. And between 2008 and 2022, which is where the most recent numbers are for, we're talking about a yearly average of 6 million shipping containers that move through the ports in Canada, roughly 6 million. Now, that's a big number. And that's a hard number to wrap your head around. I'm about to make it a lot bigger for you, because when we talk about container exams, now in that interview, the gentleman who was speaking there, the union leader, he was talking about the fact, the United States, they have much more resources. They have much more infrastructure to check these things. We don't have all of that resources and infrastructure. So boy, the United States, they're kind of the gold standard. That was the implication of where that conversation went during that interview. So if we want to know, in the best of cases, how long does it take to search a shipping container? A container exam in the United States, where they have more resources and infrastructure in Canada, can take anywhere from, at the minimum, 1 day, and at the maximum, 7 days. They have 3 different types of searches that one of the shipping companies who does a bulk of global shipping talked about. So when we're talking about the different types of shipping, you can have the random non-intrusive inspection. They take 1 to 2 days. Basically, U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers just run your container through an X-ray machine. As long as no anomalies are found and the goods seen through the X-ray match the manifest description, the goods will clear quickly. That X-ray exam takes 1 to 2 days for 1 container. The tailgate exam, these are done at the ocean terminal, where the customs officer breaks the seal on the container and looks inside. If everything is found in order, they release the container. To do just that takes 3 to 5 days for 1 container in the United States, with their infrastructure and all the people. And then we can talk about the intensive exam. If you want to go through the container and make sure that everything in the container matches the manifest for the container, this is the intensive exam. It's the most significant exam and requires the entire container to be trucked to an off-port customs exam site where the container is stripped. CES personnel unload the container, segregate designated boxes, and ready the goods for examination by a customs officer. This process can take 5 to 7 days and even longer if the port or exam site gets backed up. Air shipment examinations usually take a few days, no matter the exam type, as they happen on site. Cargo is usually already broken down, and they involve smaller quantities than ocean freight. But when we're talking about shipping containers, we are talking per container. If we were to search every container, if we were to bump up that number from 1%, we're talking about literally, if we say just 1 day, 6 million days is how long it would take to search the containers that come through. Because again, each container takes about 1 day at the minimum to do the search. It is logistically impossible to search every single container that leaves the country or comes into the country. So when people are lighting their hair on fire over the fact that in Canada, 1% of the things get searched, the alternative would literally stop shipping and Alberta's and Canada's economy far faster and far more crushingly than a 25% tariff on either side of the border. So that context is a little bit important to keep in mind while we're having this conversation, because the enormity of the work, the enormity of the goods really needs to be kept in mind. But moving on from there, Danielle Smith finally pulled the trigger. See what we did there with the pull the trigger joke? She pulled the trigger on her big announcement on what was going to be going on December 12th.
We're investing $29 million to create a new unit, the Interdiction Patrol Team, or IPT, under the command of the Alberta Sheriffs. This unit will be supported by over 50 specially trained sheriffs. 4 drug patrol dogs, critical to ensure reasonable suspicion to search vehicles. 10 cold weather surveillance drones that can operate in high winds with dedicated pilots. And 4 narcotics analyzers to test for illicit drugs. The IPT will be made up of 7 teams of sheriffs. We will also create a 2-kilometer deep border zone, which is a red zone deemed critical infrastructure to enable the sheriffs to arrest individuals found attempting to cross the border illegally or attempting to traffic illegal drugs or weapons.
There you go. So 51 sheriffs. Do you get it? Do you get the little joke that Danny's doing with $29 million of taxpayers' money, which is, for the record, like 15 years worth of interest on that sweet, sweet Atabay cash. 51st state. See, because there's 51 sheriffs and everybody wants Alberta to be the 51st state. Ha ha. So clever. But she's going to be doing drones. And this is where it gets particularly interesting. She's declaring a 2-kilometer swath of private land to now be under the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, which is to say that anybody going on there can be searched without a warrant. Anyone going on that land can be detained without a warrant. It's a pretty spicy little meatball to throw down for a party that allegedly believes in property rights. But there was a lot more to the announcement because some of the conversations had to do with what about the other provinces?
What do you make of Doug Ford's vow to cut off energy to the U.S. in the wake of the 25% tariff threats?
Well, let me be clear from the Alberta perspective. Under no circumstances will Alberta agree to cut off oil and gas exports. We don't support tariffs. I don't support tariffs on Canadian goods, and I don't support tariffs on U.S. goods, because all it does is make life more expensive for everyday Canadians and everyday Americans. So instead, we're taking a diplomatic approach, and we're meeting with our allies in the U.S. We're making the case for Alberta oil and gas to be part of the solution to energy affordability, to energy security, and to, generally speaking, North American defense security as well. And of course, we'll work with our counterparts in Montana in a shared border arrangement so that we can improve public safety, crack down on illegal migrants and illegal drug trafficking. And that's part of the reason.
And again, we have Daniel Smith going, "Oh, the migrants! They're so the migrants is the problem, and the illegal drug trafficking is the problem. That's what we're really trying to focus on here." And Alberta would never ever turn off the taps. It's not like that was something that the UCP literally campaigned on and then literally legislated on. So to be clear, the United Conservative Party, back in 2018, in the run-up to the 2019 election, Jason Kenney made it very, very clear that he would introduce legislation that would turn off the taps. This was in a big way supported by a number of current UCP ministers, current UCP MLAs, the notion of turning off the taps to the rest of Canada. If they don't treat us with the respect that we want, if they don't give us what we want, then we'll just turn off the taps to the rest of Canada. That was an appropriate strategy to leverage against the rest of Canada. But, oh my gosh, no, we could never do that to the United States. The revisionist history that's going on here is just mind-boggling, because this is something that Daniel Smith is pretending nobody in their right mind would ever consider, certainly not some of the people who are literally standing beside her in that press conference. But the question of private lands came up as well for Mike Ellis.
Large swaths of private land along the border. How do you patrol that land without accessing it, or do you get permission from the landowners? How do you handle that private land when it comes to patrolling the border?
Well, I think that's an operational question again, and this is sort of. I would just say this. Look, I think regardless of who you are, I think most people understand the importance of border security. I think most people understand the concerns regarding illegal drugs, illegal guns, and the concern regarding human trafficking. So certainly, in that particular hypothetical scenario, I would say I would hope that we're going to work very collaboratively with private property owners. But make no mistake, our friends in law enforcement will.
So again, to be clear, what the law says is once that area is designated as critical infrastructure under this Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, then law enforcement can just go on that land whenever. They can detain whomever. They can search whomever. They can arrest whomever. They can seize property whenever they want to. This is what the UCP is rolling out on the border of the southern border of the province of Alberta. But again, we've got that rhetoric going on. The guns, we got to stop the guns. Again, guns are not going from Alberta to Montana. If Americans want guns, they can get the guns. The guns are coming from the United States, coming into Alberta. If we're talking about the drugs, as we've already established, the drugs are coming from, no, they're being made here. They're being made where they're being used by and large. And then we continue with the migrants argument. But it got a little bit uncomfortable when Ellis was actually asked, how big is the illegal migrant problem?
I'm curious if there's been a single case that you can think of illegal migrants coming across the Alberta border. It's not Manitoba or Quebec where people can just sort of wander across. I'm just curious if it's a problem.
Well, part of what we're doing is to focus on the drugs, right? The drugs and the illegal guns and the human trafficking. And as I said in a previous press conference, it's a two-way street here, right? Sure, the president-elect had indicated his concerns regarding fentanyl that might be coming from Canada into the United States. Again, that's why the Premier put in my mandate letter in regards to making sure that we're shoring up the border of the United States. But this is why the Premier has had a conversation with the Governor. This is why I'm going to be having a conversation with the Attorney General in Montana. We want to make sure that the border is to shore it up, to make sure that illegal guns, illegal drugs, illegal human trafficking is coming across the border. In regards to a specific case regarding somebody walking across the border, I mean, I would only be speculating.
There's so much that I love about that clip. We've had Danielle Smith doing the national press tour talking about the migrants. We got to stop the illegal migrants. It's out of control with the illegal migrants. And then we've got the Alberta minister in charge of these things who then says, I know of no examples. I would only be speculating. And the best part of that whole piece is it was just a few minutes earlier that Danielle Smith was again doubling down on the whole illegal migrants thing. But they're trying to walk both sides of the fence because on one hand, they're again trying to say all the things that they think the Donald wants to hear. And at the same time, they're trying to flip the script on that to say, no, we're trying to connect, or we're trying to protect the Canadian side, the Alberta side. You see, that's what we're doing here. But Smith continued her press junket. And where it gets to be interesting is, there's a lot that I love about the next chunk of clips that we're going to show you here, because some of you may know we've made fun of the David Parker. We've made fun of the media juggernaut that is True North and their propensity for making children's books. True thing, you can look it up. We've made a lot of jokes about the True North, but David Parker, in the run-up to the UCP leadership review, David Parker was openly and publicly campaigning against Danielle Smith. At the same time, Rachel Parker, David Parker's wife, formerly Rachel Emmanuel, she was also publishing articles and campaigning in some more subtle ways about maybe Danielle Smith's not the greatest, maybe. But nonetheless, Rachel Parker still got her year-end interview. And, Danielle Smith did attend the Parker's wedding. We still haven't been able to find out what the wedding gift was. It was probably hockey tickets, but we don't know. And Danielle Smith was in her element. She was feeling comfortable. And so she said some very, very clear things. And before we play this clip, I want to try to frame it a little bit, because one of the things that Canada as a country, has been trying to do is to say, we need to deal with Donald Trump and his threats of tariffs as a country. We need to present a united front. This is why Danielle Smith was asked about Doug Ford's comments. Would she stand by them? Would she support them? And she said, no, we would never turn off the taps here in Alberta, despite the fact that we campaigned on it and actually made legislation for it. The question came up, what's the motivation here?
Is part of this the reason that you've sped this process up so that when U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is looking at Alberta and he's looking at tariffs and he thinks, that Danielle Smith, she's taking this seriously and he might be more willing to grant Alberta Energy an exemption from those 25% tariffs?
Well, I won't deny.
So Danielle Smith making it clear, hey, you know what? Screw Canada. I'm gonna do what I can to make the Donald happy with me. I'm gonna welcome the Donald to Alberta. I'm gonna let him know I'm taking his concerns seriously, and I'm hoping that maybe he makes a carve out for just Alberta, because we did the whole 51 sheriffs. So he's gonna get it. He's gonna see what we're trying to do here. We're trying to appease the Donald because he respects weak people. No, wait, that's the opposite thing. There was a lot more that went on into the strategy that Danielle Smith is using to appease the Donald.
On the border, I know that you said that you've been in touch with the Montana governor. I'm wondering, have you been in touch with the incoming Trump administration? Have you heard any response from them about how they're feeling about the changes you're making at your border?
I have some contacts within the administration, or at least close to to some of the senior decision makers, and so I'm making sure that we tweet out everything that we're doing, and I'm texting to make sure that those who are in a position to, I think, have influence know that we're taking it seriously.
Danielle Smith's strategy for making sure the Donald finds out about all of the things that she's trying to do to make him happy so that Alberta gets a special carve out, screw the rest of Canada, is she knows a guy who maybe knows a guy, but just to be sure they're tweeting. It's funny, but also embarrassing. But again, this is a comfortable conversation that she's having with her friend whose wedding she attended, Rachel Parker. So it shouldn't be a surprise that Danielle Smith was speaking quite candidly, but she did get pushed on a couple of issues. And one of those issues has to do with, as we highlighted last week, she talked about how it was the provincial jurisdiction to go into Coots. It was the provincial government's will that Coots was shut down and those people were arrested and charged and all of the things. And Rachel Parker, she's kind of aligned with the Freedom folks a little bit. Got to remember, her husband David Parker was besties. He was bros. They even did a little reunion show in the run up to the UCP leadership review with Mark Van Hugenbos, who has since been convicted of being one of the ringleaders at Coots. So the question of Coots came up.
When you first announced that you were going to be bolstering the security at the border, some of the media said, this isn't really your jurisdiction. You said, no, it is. Look at what happened in Coots. And when that went live, some in the freedom movement seemed very ired by this. They seemed to take it as an indication that you were trying to further distance themselves from the movement, as some have felt that you have. What's your response to this?
Well, I think I demonstrated that everything I promised to do, I've done. We have no mandates. We will never have mandates. I put in respect for bodily choice in our Bill of Rights. When the health orders were declared illegal, we refunded all of the fines. I've done as much as I can. There are some things, unfortunately, that I can't weigh in on once court process has started. That has to play itself out. But we have to take responsibility for how the contract services that we have in our province conduct themselves. The RCMP are on contract to us. The sheriffs are law enforcement. The police services get their power from the legislation that we pass. And so policing in this province.
I love that clip so much because Danielle Smith says, I did everything that I promised that I would, except for the things that I found out that I couldn't do. And the subtext of that is like the pardons, like the halting the prosecutions, like and it will forever remain my personal favorite, deputizing plane loads of tourists as diplomatic ambassadors to Florida. Those are all things that she did not do because she did not have the power to do them. But this is the recurrent theme with Danielle Smith is she just makes stuff up and throws it on the wall, sees what she can get away with. But the conversation got even bigger. For anybody who's been following federal politics, the feds did kind of a weird thing. It was poorly communicated, and I'm not convinced that it's the best move. I remain skeptical. But effectively, what the federal government did is they came out and they said, "Hey, we're trying to get all of these military-style weapons out of the public hands." What if, hey, gun retailers who are sitting on all of these guns that you could no longer sell, what if we bought them back from you and then we sent them to the Ukraine, these military style weapons? And there's a lot of conversation that has to happen there because some people have the perception that in order for a firearm to be useful in war, it has to be a fully automatic submachine gun. That's simply not true. There's a lot of uses for firearms that aren't fully automatic submachine guns. And if you know anything about the difference between suppressive fire and deliberate fire, it's not a mystery. But it is kind of strange that the federal government would say, hey, we'll take all of those guns off your hand and we'll sell them out. But what even got stranger was, you got to believe, Rachel Parker asked Danielle Smith about this, and Danielle Smith's response was some next level pro-America, pro-gun spin.
What do you think about this? Is this just a new level of propaganda that we're seeing from the Trudeau government, or is this just more kind of par for the course?
When I saw those tweets, I thought this must be fake news. Somebody must be making up some ridiculous tweet to put that out there. And then sure enough, it turned out to be true. I think that probably some of the commentary where they said, well, if it does happen and Ukrainians open up the crates, all they're going to see is a bunch of hunting rifles. Like that is not, they're trying to mischaracterize what these firearms are. And that's the thing I find frustrating. I also find it frustrating that they keep doing these things at a time that we are trying to have a new relationship with the American administration, which is Republican, which is far more supportive of the rights of law-abiding firearms owners. So it's almost like the federal government is trying to antagonize on this issue.
So you see, this is my favorite of all of the images that we got with all of our various prompts. You see, the real problem with the feds saying we're going to take these brand new, never used guns that are sitting in boxes behind retailers' shelves that retailers aren't allowed to sell anymore. We're going to give them money we're going to buy those guns from them, and then we're going to send them to the Ukraine. The problem there is, boy, that's going to make the Republicans angry because they just love their guns so much. The notion that anybody would do that with guns just makes Republicans cry. I don't know, Republican tears or something. It's wild. And the fact that she would try to pivot it into, hey, everybody, you know what? We gotta appease. We gotta make sure that the Republicans know we love them. We love their way of life. We love the guns just as much as they do. We can't make the Republicans and the Trump angry. That's not okay. But in case you think that I'm mischaracterizing that,
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau obviously flew down to Mar-a-Lago in the days since President-elect Donald Trump has been making a lot of jokes about Canada becoming the 51st state. Assuming you are someone who doesn't think that Canada should join the U.S., are you looking at this as something that is comical or something that's concerning?
I mean, I think that Trump does like to make jokes, and I think he is trolling Trudeau. I mean, let's remember, Trudeau spent the last 2 years making derogatory comments about about Trump in trying to discredit Pierre Poilievre. So you have to imagine that if you're going to weigh in on their politics, they're going to weigh in on ours. I would say that at this point, it's not helpful for the Prime Minister to be trying to engage in any a tit for tat and offering an opinion about who he would prefer to have won in the White House. I think that makes things a lot more difficult. The Americans chose who they chose, and that's who we have to deal with. That's who we have to negotiate with. So I don't think that what we're seeing is a sign of a very positive turn in the relationship, but I think it's up to our Prime Minister to maybe reset, identify the things that we can do to work more collaboratively, and hopefully we'll be able to take the temperature down on that. But I think it is also a recognition. I mean, when I look at what the president is saying there, the American economy is $27 trillion. Ours is about $2.7 trillion. There are American states that do have an economy that is larger than all of Canada, and so I think we have to be mindful of that. If anybody starts threatening tariff wars, this is not a war that we can win. It's not going to turn out well for Canadians. So I think that in his own way, yeah, he's sort of reminding us of that imbalance, and which says to me that we've got to try to find a way to get to a solution that is going to be mutually satisfactory for both of us, and try to avoid antagonizing the.
I mean, she's literally just handing Donald Trump the keys to Alberta. She's literally saying the U.S. under Donald Trump is so much bigger and so much more powerful than us. We have to just roll over and do whatever they want. And it was really unfair for the prime minister to point out in the last 2 years that a former president of the United States, was running for office again while he was a criminally convicted felon. He is a self-confessed sex offender. The prime minister shouldn't have acknowledged those realities. To make that argument is absolutely mind-blowing. For Danielle Smith to say, hey, it was so offside. Say what you will about Justin Trudeau. And I've made it clear on the show very many times. I am not a Justin Trudeau stan. I'm not a member of the Liberal Party. I'm none of those things. There's lots of things to not like about Justin Trudeau. But things that he's not: a self-confessed sex offender, a criminally convicted felon. To try to equate Justin Trudeau providing commentary on a former president who is those things running for office again with Donald Trump made some jokes, so Justin Trudeau shouldn't antagonize him. That's mind-numbing to me. It's just that it is the worst of false equivalencies. And especially when we have Danielle Smith and Mike Ellis saying, whoa, really? Okay, so maybe we don't talk about the migrants. Okay, so maybe we don't talk about the drugs. Okay, but here's what we'll do. We'll get Paul Brandt to come out and do a press conference, and we'll talk about human trafficking, because sex offenders are just the worst. And I want to be clear, sex offenders are just the worst. But also, Donald Trump is a sex offender. He said so himself. I guess that disqualifies me from ever running for prime minister or something like that. But it's this appeasement, and it's mind-blowing to me. For anybody who's familiar with the history of Canada, I mean, yes, it was while we were still a British colony, but it was folks from Canada, the space that is Canada now, who burnt the White House down this one time. I don't know how it is that we go from that to let's all be very, very good poodles and be very, very nice to the Donald and do all the tricks that he asks us to, so that he doesn't get angry at us. Smith is comparing the size of the economies, but she's not doing anything to compare the size of the populations. That's wild. It's disingenuous. And it's not the kind of leadership that Albertans should expect or accept. Moving on from there. We got a couple more clips that we got to play, because we have to pivot back to the question of the jurisdiction, because we saw yesterday, God help us and anybody who listened to it, we saw yesterday the final episode of the Danielle Smith propaganda hour, comedy hour. I'm not sure what to call it. Some people call it Your Province, Your Premier. I call it turd mining. But Danielle she had some thoughts on jurisdiction too.
NDP leader Naheed Nenshi has stated, and I'm sure a lot of Albertans are wondering the same thing, that you've consistently told the federal government to stay in its own lane, but by making this move, aren't you doing the same thing, moving from a provincial issue into what's essentially a federal matter as it pertains to the national border?
I sure wish the federal government had more border security guards, but I went down and talked to some folks in the south who happen to work at the border, and there are 55 people who work on the border. They have teams that have about 16 people on at any given time at Coots, and so they're only able to check about 1% of the vehicles. So that is the nature of the problem that we face, is that if drugs and human smuggling and guns are coming in through secret compartments in cars and commercial vehicles, there just simply isn't enough manpower at the border to be able to address it. So what are we going to do? We'll be able to set up our own commercial vehicle inspection stations with the sniffer dogs to see if there's any more that needs to be done. And it's a 298-kilometer border. So having 55 people at a single point at Coots is not something that is going to solve this problem. That's why we're setting up a 2-kilometer stretch where we're just going to say, if you're in that stretch and you're avoiding legal border crossings, you're probably up to no good. We've actually had a bunch of ranchers and landowners there reach out and say, right on, doing whatever we can, we'll do whatever we can to help. So yeah, this is our job. Policing is our job. So if you want to compare 55 border guards that they have at the border versus the fact that we've got a Lethbridge Police Service, Medicine Hat Police Service, we've got Alberta Sheriffs, we've got RCMP that is under contract to us, we've got Calgary Police Force, we've got Edmonton Police Force we can call in. We got a lot of manpower, and I think
now there's so much to unpack in that clip. Let's start at the very end, though, where she says, if we haven't secured the border, we have all of this manpower that we can deploy. And then she talks about sending down Edmonton Police and Calgary to police to secure the border, which is pretty remarkable. She talks about, hey, we can set up commercial vehicle stations where we'll have the sniffer dogs to check everything. But then she talks about how all of the vehicles that are coming through, so many of them are just people. They're just people who are traveling, who wouldn't get caught up in those commercial vehicle things. So again, we have some dissonance. She talks about, and then we heard the 1%. And again, this is another example where Danielle Smith hears one thing and then she finds ways to weave it into all of these other places that it's not accurate or true for, which is pretty remarkable. But that wasn't the only clip that came out of that show in regards to the border issue. Doug Ford came up again.
Premier Doug Ford had suggested that Canada cut off electricity supplies to the U.S. As a retaliatory measure.
Not a chance would we ever consider doing anything like that. We are trying at this moment to show the Americans that we are their best friend and ally and a secure supply of the energy that they need. They've got a strategic petroleum reserve that needs to be topped up. They get 4.3 million barrels a day from Alberta. They get substantial electricity from BC as well as Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. If you take, that's the nuclear button. If you do things like that, that doesn't just create a problem for a year or two, that creates a problem for a generation. And so I don't even think we should be talking along those lines. Tariffs are one thing, but cutting off supplies, that would be outrageous to do, and we certainly would not do any.
We would never, ever consider it. Again, it's not like the UCP ran on it on 2018. It's not like it was, I think, the very first bill that Jason Kenney enacted once he took control of the government. It's not like Jason Nixon, current Minister for Danielle Smith's government tried to re-up it in, let's go all the way back to May of 2021. Never, ever would we consider shutting off our resources. Of course they would. But Danielle Smith is afraid of Donald Trump. That's the bottom line. But also in this episode, yesterday's episode of Your Province, Your Premier, the question of, well, how do we deal with the drug dealers and the fentanyl coming from across the border? And despite the fact that criminal stuffs are federal jurisdiction, and in fact, the whole conversation is federal jurisdiction, Danielle Smith had this to say about how to deal with fentanyl dealers.
I was talking with the Montana governor, Giannaforte, and one of the things he told me they have is a mandatory 2-year sentence if you are caught dealing fentanyl. And so so I've asked Mike, I said, we as a province hold people in our provincial corrections facility if they are guilty of a crime for which the penalty is 2 years less a day. So maybe that's what we do. Maybe we just say, hey, if you're caught dealing fentanyl, there's no free pass on this one. You are going to have a mandatory sentence of 2 years less a day and serve it in our corrections facility. Because keep in mind, we also, in our corrections facilities, have therapeutic living units, which is a recovery program for addicts, which has been very successful in getting people completely clean. So I think it's a two-part approach. We've got to be serious about cutting off the supply and punishing those who are dealing this deadly drug. But then we also have to be compassionate to those who are hooked and get them into recovery and treatment and detox.
It's just the jurisdiction, though. But what if we change the penalties for dealing drugs, which is a criminal code issue, which is federal? What if we change the penalties as a province to force people into provincial prisons where we could then force them to accept treatment, never minding the fact that the maximum sentence is 10 years. So she would actually be providing smaller sentences for drug dealers. There's just so much going on there that's all so confusing. Moving on from there. And this is our last chunk. Again, it's another Lord of the Rings episode. We're going to do our 2 hours. We will make sure that we have another open mic section next weekend. But we got to get through this stuff tonight. We got to talk about the Green Line, because the Green Line has been a fascinating failure by multiple levels of government, multiple administrations. So let's be clear on that. The Green Line goes way back. Way back. And one of the problems that's happened with the Green Line repeatedly is that multiple governments, particularly UCP governments since 2019, have said, we're going to pause. We're going to put a hold on the Green Line stuffs for a minute. We're just going to put pause on that. We want to do our assessment, and then we'll come back and we'll let you know. And they put a pause on things, and then they do an assessment on things, and they come back and they say, okay, no, you had it right. That's historically what's happened. And so because of all of these delays, because of COVID, because of a lot of other delays, the prices have gone up for all of the things, because inflation isn't just a thing that affects the price of bread and milk. It also affects construction materials and all of those other things. So the question of the Green Line is very, very, very complex. But if we go back to the most recent iteration, the most recent boondoggle, we have to go to the end of August, beginning of September, because all the way through August, Devin Dreeshen was saying, absolutely, the plan for the Green Line, they can count on the money. It's money in the bank. We're going to make the Green Line happen. It's taken too long. This is going to be a thing. And then very suddenly he changed his tone. And Danielle Smith provided some very clear insight in the run up to all of the things that we're going to talk about next, as to why these changes were being made.
What we have committed to doing is asking an engineering firm to give us an alternate route. See, if we start at where the event center is going to be, also with a future Union Station in mind. How far south can we go? How much would it cost, and how do we get there? And then let's talk about using, I've committed to the mayor that once we get that back, we'll bring it to them and see if they're committed to continuing to partner with us on that. We've reached out to our federal counterparts as well to let them know that that's the approach that we would like to take. And then the second phase of that, we'll see what would be the alignment for us to be able to serve North Calgary as well. And it may be that using the Deerfoot Valley on the route to the airport and then further up to Airdrie, which is one of the things we want to do using the existing CP rail line, maybe that's the best way to serve North Calgary.
Got to keep an open mind. Never mind the fact that there's already been hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on reports, on assessments to determine what are the best possible routes. It's been done to death. One of the questions that came up after this decision was made was, if you went to an above ground route as opposed to a tunneled route, what sort of impact would that have? And the city of Calgary commissioned a bunch of different things to address that. They brought forward a bunch of different pieces of information to try to figure out exactly what that would cause. And one of the things that they found was that it would have catastrophic effects on the value of a variety of different properties downtown. So there's some big issues with changing the plan from going underground to going above ground. From that city report, the cumulative effect of the Green Line elevated city center alignment option is a loss of between 100 to 160 million of the existing office, retail, and condominium stock in the corridor. This is a loss of 4.5 to 6.9% of the affected floors, or 0.9 to 1.4% of the entire building stock of all of the properties in the corner. In context, a loss of 4.5 to 6.9% of property is a drop equivalent to that which occurred in the median property value in Calgary during the 2008 economic crisis. So going above ground has some massive impacts. But that's exactly what the province announced that they were going to do. But they announced it in a very strange way, because all they released was a map. They didn't release a report. They didn't release any other information. They just said, this is the route that we're going to take instead. And basically what the province has done is they've said, okay, well, it costs too much to go underground. So if we go above ground, then we can save a boatload of money, and then we can get the route to go way farther south, and we can get it go farther for cheaper, and that will get more ridership. But the consequences to the core have apparently been overlooked. This was highlighted very clearly by podcast host Corey Hogan, who pointed out that the province's proposal for elevated LRT goes directly through the busiest skywalk in Calgary. It literally just cuts through the busiest skywalk on one of the busiest indoor malls in Calgary, right in the downtown core. So to drop a C-train line right through the middle of that would sever the ability for people to move throughout that whole corridor. It's a fascinating choice. But that's exactly what Danielle Smith has been advocating for. Let's go back in time again. Again, that first clip that we played was from September 11th. Let's go to September 13th, where Devin Dreeshen talked about the contract.
For everybody watching, what's next? What will we see play out? And will we get a look at sort of new proposals here in the near future?
Yeah, so we, as a province, we love building LRT projects, because obviously that relieves traffic for commuter traffic, for truck and car traffic. So we love to see transit projects work. We've been working with the City of Calgary on the Blue Line that'll eventually connect into the Calgary Airport. We've worked with the City of Edmonton on their LRT projects. But when it comes to the Green Line, our new engineering firm that we've contracted out will have a new alignment that will ideally stretch down to Shepherd and even to Seaton, to the South Calgary Health Campus, which again is going to see a big increase in the amount of riders for this transit system. So we're looking forward to it. We're still working with the City of Calgary, and I hope Calgarians, this new alignment is something.
Now it's interesting, because Devin Dreeshen said in that clip, this organization, this company that we've contracted, that they've said they're going to take a look at the things. It's going to be great. We're going to do the biggest review that's ever been done. Well, we kind of got curious. So we thought, hey, why don't we do what literally anybody can do? Go ahead. If you don't believe us, you can Google it right now. Google Alberta sole sourced contracts. And then you click on the thing and it takes you to the table. And you can see all of the sole source contracts for government business. And then what you want to do is in department, you want to go to transportation and economic corridors. And then you want to click on start date. So the most recent start date is at the very, very top. And if you do that, you will see that transportation and economic corridors did indeed get a sole source contract with AECOM. AECOM is apparently how everybody's pronouncing it. AECOM out of Stony Plain Road in Northwest Edmonton. The services were an alternate alignment of Calgary Green Line project. The contract number is 24916. The start date is where it gets interesting because for that whole week, we had UCP ministers. We had the Premier of Alberta talking about this wonderful company that they had contracted to do all of this work. But when you take a look at when the contract was actually started, it was September 17th, days after they'd already said that they got the contract done. But where it gets really interesting is when you take a look at the value of that sole sourced contract, because you see the UCP has made this argument, we can't just throw money away. We can't just be doing that. We've got to be responsible with taxpayers' money as we allow Atabay Pharmaceuticals to earn an estimated $2 million a year on interest and taxpayers' money that they don't have to do anything with. We got to be responsible with taxpayers' money as we spend $29 million on securing a border that is for reasons that are not real. We have to spend for a report to be done in 2.5 months to come up with an alternate alignment of the Green Line. We have to spend $2,468,949.00 because that's how much the sole sourced contract cost. Danielle Smith was very clear about why she wants to make these big changes. It's not about saving money. It's about her vision for rail in Alberta.
So since your government expressed your intent to take over the Green Line, there's been talk about proposed realignments along Deerfoot and stuff that have been dismissed as infeasible for many good reasons. And I worry this is because you want to build the line for as cheap as possible, and maybe there's influence from private companies such as Lyricon. So my question is, how can we trust that your government will build a Green Line alignment that will serve the needs of Calgarians as best as possible in the city for the next century, even if it isn't the cheapest option or doesn't align with the interests of private companies?
Well, look, we're going to talk with the city about what we do for a northern option, but I think we want to work on this together with them. I feel just in looking at the process, we've been disconnected from it, as has the federal funding partners, and even council has really delegated the oversight to an independent board, and things went a little off the rails, shall we say, because of that. So we would want a new governance structure where we can be making these decisions better. I mean, we have expertise on building large capital projects through transportation and economic corridors. We're in the middle of doing a review of how we would be able to build out an entire commuter rail system. And so my thinking is this, that Airdrie to Okotoks has a line that is currently fed by heavy rail. That's the kind of rail that CP uses. And we've begun our conversations with CP about whether we might be able to build a companion line on their right-of-way that would be dedicated to passenger service going all the way from Okotoks through the south, stopping in downtown, going north, stopping at the airport, and going on up to Airdrie. And that may be the way that we serve the south or the north if we're able to bring in a number of different feeder buses and park and rides. That may be a good option that's more cost effective. I don't want to rule that out as an option. But the first step is going to be a re-engineered look at how we can build the South Line all the way out to Seaton, which was what was promised to to Calgarians, and that was what we're working on doing. I hope we can get that far, because I think that would be a win for all three levels of government.
So let's be clear. The pitch that Danielle Smith has made with this new report to the city of Calgary and to all Albertans that will be paying for it does not get the line to Seton, which was her stated goal. It gets the line to Shepherd. So already Danielle Smith is moving the goalposts in regards to what are the reasons why we're doing this. We got to get to Seton. Okay, I guess we can't get to Seton. We're still going to do a big thing really, really badly. And the notion that CP Rail is somehow going to share their rail with transit so that people can go from North Calgary, take feeder buses to the Deerfoot Valley, and go from North Calgary all the way to Smith's imagined Grand Central Station, her Union Station. The name keeps changing, but that's okay. That's been panned. It simply won't work. Again, referring you back to how many shipping containers come through. There's a lot of product that needs to get moved in the province of Alberta, and there's not the bandwidth on those rail lines to just throw in some regular usable public transit. But she started to in that same thing. By the way, that was September 14th, so still days before the contract was signed. She started to talk about maybe what the real motivators were.
I must tell you, like Jim Gray and that Green Line group that he's put together, they had hired their own engineers, saying that there was no way it was ever going to be built for $4.4 billion. And I've been watching their work for some time. And so when it got to a point where clearly the costs were escalating and we aren't going to see an end in sight, I just thought, you know what, we've got to regroup and rethink this. The approach I would like to take in future for these mega projects is I would like to see, if we're going to have three parties funding it, then maybe three parties need to be at the table for oversight, because then we can troubleshoot along the way. I seem to recall back in the Dave Brown-Kanye era, someone told me that in the construction of the West Leg, he was meeting every single week with the project leads on that, troubleshooting along the way, making sure that there was direct oversight from his office. And you may have to have him on to give his opinions if he's willing to give them. But that to me is the kind of the direction I want to go on a lot of our infrastructure. Is I just frankly, it's sort of trust but verify. You want to make sure that the experts are able to do the work in the engineering, but if there are things that we can modify along the way, I think we need to have that better political oversight. So we'll be looking at seeing if we can develop a new approach once we get the report back on the south leg of the Green Line LRT, but I'd be looking to be quite a bit more.
So with all things, Danielle Smith believes that she has the best answers to all of the problems, what with her no engineering degree and her no transit degree. She's got a degree in economics, so she should, of all people, be able to understand how a $4.4 billion project that was originally started with a budget of $4.4 billion, the better part of 30 years ago, there would be inflation on that. But you know what they say, if you don't use the skills, you lose them. Again, that was September 14th. Here's another clip.
One of the companies that we've used in the past successfully is one that has given us an assessment on the Blue Line. We want to extend the Blue Line all the way to the airport. We've got sort of the next leg that we funded to 88th Avenue, but we want to have another avenue so that we can at least start building out that airport station. But they are going to take a look at this. And look, I mean, I share Calgarians' aspiration. It'd be wonderful to have a northern leg of our LRT system that goes up to 160th, as well as a southern leg that goes down to Seton. The question is, does it all have to be one line? Can you have a different terminal point? Look at them as two separate projects. That's what we're asking. We're saying, if we started where the event center is going to be and a downtown Union Station that gathers everybody in one place so that they can go on to the other lines, how far south could we go? Could we go to Shepherd, or could we even go to Seton? And then let's have another conversation about an.
So again, Danielle Smith, let's just throw the North under the bus. Why does it have to be a contiguous line? Why can't we just have everything centered around this dream project of mine, this Grand Central Station that will include heavy rail trains to Banff? Because I really, really, really want that. It's not about providing public transit. It's about manipulating the model sufficiently so that Danielle Smith can get what she wants, so that her donors, Lyricon Capital was mentioned, so that her donors can get what they want. That's what it's all about. And it's worth remembering that when we're talking about the train to Banff, this is something that the UCP government previously looked at. Prasad Panda, Jason Kenney looked at this and they said, there's no business case for it. No. And then all of a sudden, Danielle Smith gets in and she believes that it's going to be the greatest thing ever. And we need to build this Grand Central Station, this Union Station in downtown Calgary so she can run her train set through it. It's absolutely ridiculous. But since you're provincing, you're premiering, we're going to continue on with that. But before we do, we wanted to share one other little thing about the Green Line piece. Because we were sent this screenshot via DM. And this screenshot is, if it's a real picture of the scope of work that was given to AECOM, it's very, very clear that the deck was stacked. The conclusion was reached before Danielle Smith spent $2.5 million of taxpayers' money to get it typed out for her. The Ministry of Transportation and Economic Corridors is developing a source proposal to examine an alignment for the Green Line project that works for Calgarians and Alberta taxpayers. The proposal will develop 2 to 3 at-grade or elevated alignments that integrate the red and blue lines along 7th Avenue, continuing to the future Grand Central Station at Calgary's new Arena Entertainment District. So again, this document makes it very clear, Grand Central Station, foregone conclusion. And then above ground to the community of Shepherd, with an option to extend to Seton. Additionally, the consultant will explore the potential of an above ground or elevated alignment extension from 7th Avenue to Eau Claire. The alignment will consider construction costs, the impact on ridership of the green, blue, and red lines, the impact on operations of the existing red and blue lines, impact to existing downtown infrastructure, including the plus 15 pedway network, which they seem to have just literally plowed right through, potential stakeholder considerations with an at-grade or elevated alignment, and interactions with the CPKC rail line. The work will include identifying and quantifying the cost of risk regarding project delays due to the revised procurement strategy and land acquisition challenges and potential development concerns. The work will not include the costs and risks regarding the winding down the downtown underground alignment. So the costs of backing away from the existing downtown alignment, all the work that has been done for the underground alignment, we're just not going to talk about that, including the cancellation or deferral of Eau Claire Station and potential litigation, termination of existing contracts with the city's development partner or subcontractors, miscellaneous work that needs to be closed off, stranded sunk costs, purchase of light rail vehicles, and incremental costs specifically attributable to delays in completing detailed engineering and commencing construction. So let's be super clear. The picture that Danielle Smith wanted painted is, I'd like a report that says all of the good things about the things that I want and none of the bad things about the reality of the current situation. I don't want the report to take into consideration any of the costs involved with the change in plans. I don't want the report to take into consideration any of the legal implications of the change in plans. I just would like a report that says very, very, very nice things, please and thank you. Which brings us to, again, yesterday's Your Province, Your Premier.
Having that elevated portion adds a new wrinkle, though.
Well, we have an elevated portion downtown. We've got the Westleg LRT, and so it's not having an elevated portion is not unusual. But when you look at the underground river systems in Calgary, the complexity of trying to do that, already the cost escalation had gone up. We don't know what the additional complexities would be. So I don't think tunneling is the answer. The question is this the right approach? And I guess that'll be up to council.
Now, there's a lot, as always, to unpack here because Danielle Smith is making the claim, well, we've got the above ground component on the west leg of the downtown C train. But it's really important to highlight that the above ground, the elevated stuff, doesn't actually start until you're pretty much out of downtown. It's not going through downtown. The elevation all starts once you've gone past the 11th Street. Then the track lifts up, then it becomes elevated, but it's not going through any major areas. And if anything, it's piggybacking on top of existing rail lines. So you can't compare the west leg that runs on the outside of downtown Calgary pushing west with one that will run all the way through the center of downtown Calgary because there's more buildings and stuff. It's a wild little argument to make. Which brings us to the last clip of the night, and then we're done. It's been a long show. I know. So much to cover. And everybody thinks holidays, Fridays, it'll be fine. No. Not in Alberta. That's when all of the things happen because everybody else is doing all of the other things. So let's see how much we can just flood the zone and get away with. And this is the piece of your province, your premier, that I find myself legitimately wondering whether or not this was Danielle Smith finally saying the quiet part out loud, finally answering the question that so many journalists have been chasing after for so long. Now that all the year-end interviews are done, this is her last big media appearance. If this was not just her finally throwing up both middle fingers and saying, I'm going to answer the question on my show, because that's exactly what she did. For anybody who's unfamiliar, one of the questions that have been going on in regards to a lot of Danielle Smith's legislation that many legal scholars, many legal experts, many medical experts have said violates human rights is, would Danielle Smith be willing to invoke the notwithstanding clause in order to suppress human rights in the province of Alberta, in order to violate human rights, in order to violate the Charter of Freedoms in the province of Alberta? Would Danielle Smith be willing to invoke the notwithstanding clause? And as we've highlighted on the show before in conversations with multiple legal scholars, multiple lawyers, the notwithstanding clause exists only as a provision for provinces to say, yes, I understand that there's human rights that are in the Charter, but we would like to violate those. We would like to just disregard those. We would like to set those aside for a period of 5 years. That's what the notwithstanding clause is. It's not for business reasons. It's not for economic reasons. It's not for pipelines. It's not for oil and gas. It's for human rights. It's for a province to say, the leadership of a province to say, yes, we understand that the courts have ruled this way. We understand that the courts have said that we would be violating someone's human rights if we do this thing, but we just don't care. Danielle Smith has been pursued for answers. She's given some half-assed answers that kind of have led people to believe. Certainly, we've had a couple of clips that we've highlighted on the show over the last year, pointing out that she has very clearly mused that that would be something that she would do. She laid any questions about her support and her belief in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to rest yesterday.
I don't want to use the notwithstanding clause because, again, it says to me that you haven't been very careful in your law crafting if that's the way that you have to go. We feel we've been very careful in our law crafting, that when you look at the court has a reasonableness test. They say, okay, is it reasonable? Is it proportionate to solve the problem? And is it evidence-based? And that's the frame that we're bringing to things. That's why we're taking some time with our compassionate intervention, because we know that if we can be a reasonable, proportionate, as well as show evidence, and we do have an accumulating base of evidence about our recovery program, we think that that will hold up against a charter challenge. Same thing with the policies protecting kids. I'm watching in California, a woman who's now 20, who went to a doctor at age 12 expressing gender dysphoria got put on puberty blockers right away, got put on cross-sex hormones at 13, and had a double mastectomy at 14. And now at age 20, she's saying, why did they let me do that? And that's why we have put policies in place to say these are adult decisions to be made by adults. And I think because we're evidence-based, because of what we're seeing happen around the world, because there was the seminal work done by Hillary Cass in the UK, I think it will stand up. That's what we're going to argue, that we're being reasonable, proportionate, and evidence-based, and we'll see how it goes in court. But because I feel so strongly about protecting kids' right to preserve their fertility until they're adults, we would, as a last resort, have to use the notwithstanding clause. Hope it doesn't come to that. But
So let's be clear about a few things. That's Danielle Smith. Danielle Smith, who says that one of the big things about being a leader is admitting when you're wrong. Danielle Smith, who says that she wants to live up to the standards of Ralph Klein, because Ralph could admit when he made a mistake. Ralph could admit when he did something wrong. Ralph could apologize. Danielle Smith, who talks about how she is such a big supporter of the charter. That's her saying that if the courts say, no, Danny, what you're doing is wrong. You are violating the law. You are violating the charter. That's Danielle Smith saying she doesn't give a good goddamn. So go ahead and she'll invoke the notwithstanding clause. And the fact that she lists out the things that she believes makes a law valid, again, demonstrates such a dim understanding, because what she's talking about is the Oakes test. This is something that got famous during the COVID years, where a government temporarily puts in restrictions, temporarily revokes a charter right because of a big thing. That's what she's talking about. And it doesn't apply here. If Danielle Smith decides to put forward legislation, which she has, and that legislation gets challenged in court, which this will be, and the courts say, no, this is a violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and she invokes the notwithstanding clause, what she is saying is she doesn't care what the courts say. She doesn't care what the charter says. Her word is the be-all and end-all. She gets to decide what's right and what's wrong. And the founding documents of this country be damned. If she fails in the courts and she invokes the notwithstanding clause, she's willfully choosing to violate human rights, which is wild, because this is somebody who rode to the UCP leadership by claiming that she was a champion of human rights. She was a champion of the charter. But again, Danielle Smith seems to repeatedly pick on the things that she wants and run with them. And it turns out that the only thing that Danielle Smith may very well have in common with Ralph Klein is deploying the notwithstanding clause. Because Ralph Klein deployed the notwithstanding clause to stop gay marriage in the province of Alberta. Not a club that you would think that Danielle Smith wants to be a part of, but apparently she's rushing headfirst into it. And that's it. That's what we got for tonight, folks. Got a little bit of housekeeping we got to do, and then we're gonna talk about some of the things that we want to talk about, and we'll go from there. To start with, we only got a couple of live shows left. Got a couple of interview shows, and this is where I'm very excited about the 18th. This is the show that we're going to drop hopefully tomorrow for our patron sponsors, definitely on Wednesday for the world. it's gonna challenge y'all because we're doing something a little bit different. Everybody says, "Oh, the breakdown. You guys are progressive shills," which is wild because the number of progressives that say that we aren't progressive enough. It's fun. But what if we do something different? What if instead of having on experts, instead of having on scholars, people with qualifications, what if instead of doing all of that, we flip the script a little bit? And I want to talk about one of my favorite documentaries of all time, because I got to justify this. Because I know there's going to be some folks who watch Wednesday's episode and they're just going to die so much. There's a documentary called The Fog of War. It is a documentary biopic on a very pivotal figure in American politics, Robert McNamara. Robert Strange McNamara. And in it, the documentary explores Robert McNamara's rules for navigating the world. And one of the things that he stresses is that you have to empathize. You have to understand the people that you find yourself in conflict with. And so on Wednesday, we're going to do just that, because we're going to have two UCP members who were involved in crafting some UCP policy, not the stuff that made it to the AGM so much, and that's part of the conversation. But we're going to hear about why they are choosing to be members of a party that's doing all of these things. And it's dissonant. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a challenging conversation. I'm not going to lie to you. But there are some major, major, major lessons that anybody who wants to try to move the needle in politics that come out of this conversation that we have with these two folks. So this is where, after almost 6 years of creating content, we're going to ask you guys, our audience, to give it a chance, give it a shot, listen to it. I know the reflex to be angry. And you could be very angry at Daniel Smith. You could be very angry at the government. But if you want to move the needle on politics in this province, understanding why it is that reasonable, rational, kind people are still choosing to align themselves with the UCP, understanding that is going to be super, super, super important. It is a worthwhile conversation. It is a respectful conversation. It is a good faith conversation. And it's there are going to be people who yell at their devices. I have no doubts about that. But give it a try. We got some other stuff coming that we got planned as well. We got a couple of year wrap up episodes. We're going to bring in some of our favorite experts to hear from them what they thought the biggest moves in Alberta politics were, what the biggest events of Alberta politics were, and most importantly, perhaps, what are the biggest things that they're going to be looking forward for? What are the biggest things they're going to be watching for? And we've got a diverse group of voices for that as well. Some of them you know. I think all of them you know. They've been on the show many times before. That's why they probably agreed to do it. We're going to be presenting that before the year is over. But I want to talk about the new year too, because it's going to be busy. We have some FOIPs that we are waiting to get back. We have some FOIPs that we've gotten back. And so I wanted to give you a little preview of some of the things that we're going to be working on. We're going to be working on a series. That's right, a series. With maybe a little documentary off to the side, depending on how ambitious we decide to be, about the coal mines that are being pushed forward in southern Alberta, because it is a huge, catastrophic issue. We've talked about it many times on the show before, but we're going to actually maybe do a road trip. It's going to be some fun. We're going to talk to some folks. It's going to be some fun. We're also going after right-wing media. We've done it before. We've gone after True North. We've gone after the Western Standard. But there's also another piece that gets to be very, very important, where we're going to be talking about some of the other organizations that are involved in pushing narratives. We're going to be talking about where they get their money from. And we are going to be trying to take a look at how much money the government of Alberta is deliberately and directly siphoning off of taxpayers to make sure that these right-wing organizations with absolutely no credibility continue to do what they do. So it's going to be so much. We got so much planned. It's going to be a great new year. So we're very, very excited about all of the things that we have planned. Of course, our patrons will always get first access to all of those things that aren't live because that's what we do. We are also looking at a way to have maybe a little bit of a mini year-end celebration with our patrons. So it'll be fun. That being said, here's the plugs. Here's the things. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, you can always sign up to be one of our supporters at at our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Small amount of money, you can really write your ticket there. You can be one of our Patreon supporters, and you do get early access to all of our interview episodes and some of the other specials that we do. But the biggest thing that you get is the warm and fuzzy feeling of knowing that you're helping us to be a pain in the butt to so many people. So you can do the Patreon. If you're not a patron, if you're not looking at the long-term commitments, then you can also send e-transfers to info@thebreakdownab.ca. That's options too. And then we have the merch. We're going to try to refresh and expand the merch line a little bit in the new year. We're going to be keeping the mugs, though, because I love my Breakdown mug. I have my morning coffee out of it just about every morning. I love it. We have the hoodies, too. We have all of this is done in conjunction with our folks at abpoly.ca. The link for all of this will be in the description for the show. We also have the t-shirts. There's a lot to unpack here and keep the conversation going. And then we also have the hats. I got mine finally, and I'm so excited because it's very cold outside. I don't like it one bit, but having that the hat keeps my head warm. This one's good for summer for shade. That one's good for keeping my head warm. And that's about it. I want to say thank you to our chat group. And I apologize. I have a tendency of putting the in front of just about everything. I say the internets. I say apparently the Ukraine. That is... I have been told by the chat tonight, not correct. I would like to apologize for that. I will endeavor to defeat that little idiosyncrasy in my language, and I will try to do my very best to simply say Ukraine, because the Ukraine is not. Damn it! Ukraine is not part of the Soviet Union, nor should it be. It's not a part of Russia, nor should it be. It's just Ukraine. My bad. My apologies to the chat. See, I do pay attention. Love you guys. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, little review, do the stars thing. And if you're watching on the YouTubes, then press the like button, subscribe. And, if you could share the content, if there's an episode that you like, please do share it out. Because the more people that we get in front of, the better. So there's that too. And we're going to throw it out there as well. If you have a favorite episode from the dumpster fire of the last year that we've done, I think we're almost like 75 episodes, just about. If you have a favorite episode for the last 2 weeks of December going into the end of the year, or maybe just the last week, depending on how many people we hear from, we're going to do our top 5 most beloved episodes of 2024, just to put it out there. We'll do a recap, because apparently people discover us and then they're like, "Oh, you have this back catalog? I didn't know." So we're gonna highlight the best of our back catalog. I already know the episodes that I want. But there we go. That's the whole thing. Thank you guys so much. We'll be back next Sunday with another live show. I have one more clip that I want to play before I do my final wrap up.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
Every time. It gets me every time. It never gets old. It's the second nod. I don't know why that's so entertaining for me, but boy, it's entertaining. I love it so much. Thank you guys all so much. Have a good week. We'll see you on the 18th for our very challenging conversation with two UCP members. In the meantime and in between time, keep the conversation going.